And in the end, there was a conclusion. Now, those people who get started in news writing, they don't spend a lot of time worrying about the conclusion a lot of the time. But that's not the case in the kind of writing that we're pursuing here. So let's get into how we start to develop it, oftentimes, although there's a multitude of ways to conclude your article well. So here we need to write to the end. We need to make sure that the reader is all filled up, that we've gotten the story completed, that we're going to get the reader to the end, and we're going to feel them sigh with us that we've completed this story and they feel like they've completed a journey with us. So what it's not is a term paper. It's not, I've run out of information, so this is what I'm going to put at the end. It's not kind of fittering away into nothing, which is what we often do in news articles. You have to really come at the conclusion very proactively and with great purpose behind it. As I mentioned to you earlier, I will often find a great quote while I'm interviewing or when I'm transcribing, and I set that one aside. So one of the things that I do when I'm structuring my story is I'll find the anecdote or the quotes that I need for my lead, and I'll move them to the beginning, and then I'll find the quote that I want at the end, and then I'll put that at the end of my notes, and then I'll start to structure everything in between into the body, and that will help me sort of see the shape. So that kind of goes into that idea of outlining, which I do by using the quotes to outline it. But I know what I want in the beginning, and I definitely know what I want at the end. So what I like to do a lot of times is what we call a tieback, which is introduced, and I introduce something in the lead, and then I reintroduce it in the conclusion. And you know, it's one of those things that just makes me feel like the story has come full circle. So let's take a look at an example of that. Here's a story that ran in Esquire about John Stewart. So, you know, please feel free to pause, and I'd love for you to read this lead, which is just terrific and really descriptive, and then read the conclusion and see how we come back to where we were. Now, another aspect that we utilize a lot is a quote. So as I mentioned to you, I will save my last quote to the end, and sometimes I leave it a quote, sometimes I paraphrase it. It really depends on what's going on in there and which way I think it works best. But you sort of think of it as like a kicker ending, and it manages to sum up your story without being a summation. So here's an example of this. There's an article that I've given you on the iTunes U course that's called "The Art of the Steal: On the Trail of the World's Most Ingenious Thief." Yeah, and it was in Wired. And so the story runs us through this whole experience of this gentleman who was the world's most ingenious thief. And this is how the conclusion goes: that he's been caught and he goes to court, and the judge had a similar thought during Blanchard's plea hearing. The banks, quote, should hire him and pay him $1 million a year, he said. And right before sentencing, the judge turned directly to Blanchard. I think that you have a great future ahead of you if you wish to pursue an honest style of life, he said, although I'm not prepared to sign a letter of reference. So another option that you have in concluding is similar to the tieback, but it's considered a circular ending where there's something that you've specifically mentioned in the lead, and now you're going to come back to it in the conclusion because you really want the reader to feel full circle. So the article that I've given you here, the lead and the conclusion, is the full articles on the iTunes U course. It's a story I wrote called "When Pets Die" for Columbus Monthly, and it was about my dog Cody, and he died. This is called a personal experience story, and I didn't know what to do when he died because I'd never been responsible for a pet who had died before. So I successfully pitched this story in saying, you know, a lot of people face this situation. What are the options that are out there, you know, in terms of cremation or burial or whatever you would want to do to honor your pet? And so this was the lead that I wrote was a first-person lead, we call it, where we're talking about Cody in my experience. So if you could just, you're welcome to read this, but most notably, I wanted to look at the fourth paragraph. In death, he's reduced physically to the contents of this box, gray bone and ash. It sits on a dining room shelf accompanied by Cody's photo in a black metal frame and his paw print made post-mortem at the Ohio State University Veterinary Hospital. So the reason I want you to notice that is that when we get to the conclusion, those things come back. So a week after Cody died, a package came from Dr. Glassman. Inside were 2 envelopes and a small disc wrapped in a padded blue cloth. I opened the card from Glassman, acknowledging our shared experience and confirming our euthanasia decision. You did the right thing, he wrote, though we knew that his words provided a sense of peace. Inside the other envelope lay a small pile of coal-colored fur, still soft, though no longer bearing the scent of the carefree canine to which it had once belonged. Finally, I unwrapped the padding and held a palm-sized print of Cody's left front foot. I could tell which foot because of the nail missing from his second toe. His name was etched in the surface, and there were bits of his hair caught in the plaster. I held that print for a long time, tracing the edges of the pads of the foot that had once roamed our backyard, cavorted through Whetstone Park, and gently stepped over my sleeping son. With the print now warm from my hand, I laid it on top of Cody's box of ashes, alongside his photo in the black metal frame. So my goal was is that you would feel that you had completed this journey with me because we started at the beginning and we came back to it at the end.